everyone. A warm welcome to one and all to the 8th session of the In Conversation with series under the Track 1 activities of the STI Policy 2020 formulation process. Since more than 1 month, we have been interacting with various policy practitioners, thought leaders, eminent industry experts who have given valuable inputs and insights to enrich the STI Policy 2020 and build a robust STI ecosystem in India. In today's exciting session, our guest speaker is none other than the renowned industrialist Shri Baba Kalyani, the chairman and MD of Bharat Forge Ltd. And to steer today's conversation, we have our expert moderator, Mr. Janak Nabar. He heads the Center for Technology, Innovation and Economic Research, a Pune-based think tank. The event is being live streamed on Science Policy Forum YouTube channel. We request our audience to ask questions, share the concerns on social media platform during the conversation with hashtag #ChatWithBabaKalyani. I repeat, please share your ideas and thoughts with hashtag #ChatWithBabaKalyani. We'll be taking these questions in the live Q&A session, which is the last segment of today's event. I must say that I'm super excited for the session and hope you are excited too. So without further ado, I request Janak to initiate today's discussion. Over to you, Janak.
Thank you, Nimita. It's a great honor to be here with all of you, and especially to be in conversation with Shri Baba Kalyani. Before I introduce him, he really needs no introduction, but before I introduce him, I'd just like to thank all of you for firstly inviting me here, but also for the tremendous efforts that all of you have put in over the last, I think, 6-7 months. Have been associated at different points with this process. And it's really commendable that the Office of the PSA and the FT has been able to put such a massive exercise together in such an effortless manner. So our speaker, as I said, really needs no introduction, but his CV is so inspiring that I really would want to take you through it briefly, and hopefully we'll all be inspired by it. Shri Baba Kalyani is the chairman and MD of Bharat Forge. Bharat Forge is the world's largest forging company and has a presence in several sectors: the automotive sector, aerospace, marine, oil and gas, railways. They have 10 manufacturing locations spread across the US, India, Sweden, France, and Germany. He is the recipient of several national and international awards and recognitions. He was awarded the Padma Bhushan by the Government of India, the Order of the Rising Sun, Gold and Silver Star by the Government of Japan, the Knight in the Order of the Legion of Honor by the Government of France, and the Cross of the Order of Merit by the Government of Germany. He's also associated with several trade, industry, and educational institutions. He is the founding chairman of the Pratham Pune Foundation. Mr. Kalyani holds a Bachelor of Engineering degree from BITS Pilani and an MS from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So over to you, Shri Baba Kalyani, to really hear your views on a technology-led future for India.
Thank you, Janak, for this introduction. Thank you, Nimita. It's indeed a great privilege and a pleasure to share my perspectives on the proposed Science, Technology and Innovation Policy 2020. At the outset, I should congratulate Dr. Harshvardhan, the Honorable Minister of Science and Technology, Professor Vijay Raghavan, the Principal Scientific Advisor, and the entire group under Dr. Akhilesh Gupta of the Science Policy Forum for their untiring and focused efforts in drafting the new Science, Technology and the STIP 2020. I should particularly acknowledge the 4-track STIP formulation process involving wide and in-depth consultations among stakeholder groups, ranging from governments, academia, science community, researchers, industry, amongst others. The issues being identified and the guiding principles charted out from the focused intervention with target groups would help provide the necessary structure and address to all aspects holistically in drafting the policy framework. Very good work by the team. The Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, STIP 2020, is being drafted in the backdrop of a global pandemic when the entire world is busy combating the unprecedented humanitarian and economic strife that is caused by the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. While we battle the pandemic and shuffle between lockdowns and unlockdowns, COVID-19 has brought an unprecedented sense of urgency to the evolution of scientific innovations, from the conception of an idea to developing a prototype to mass production on the ground and deployment of innovation and solutions. The scientific community world over is coming together on a war footing, leveraging innovations to mount a scientifically rigorous response to this novel coronavirus. If you go back in history, history tells us that the world has witnessed some of the best innovations in times of crisis. Back in the 1930s, which was known largely for the economic depression period in the United States and other parts of the world, but it was also arguably the most technologically progressive and productive decade. The jet engines, radio telescopes, radar, electron microscopes, nylon, textile, and several household products were invented during this decade. The United States in particular saw a huge surge in highway construction projects and rapid advancements in urban and rural electrification, thereby resulting in tremendous increase in productivity and efficiency. The number of problems people solved and the ways they discovered how to build stuff more efficiently is a forgotten story of the 30s and early 40s that actually helps explain a lot of why the rest of the 20th century was so prosperous. The World War II began with a soldier on a horseback in 1939 and ended with nuclear fission in 1945. As I have quoted a few times in the recent past, citing Freedom Forge book by Arthur Herman, within a short span of 4 to 5 years, from 1940 to 1945, the United States transformed the American Army from a hollow shell into a truly global force, laying the foundation of the company's rise as an economic as well as a military superpower. Freedom Forge, the book reveals how, answering to President Roosevelt's call for the nation, through extraordinary American businessmen, General Motors President William Knudsen and a shipbuilder, Henry Kaiser, helped cajole and inspire business leaders across the United States to mobilize the arsenal of democracy that propelled the Allies to victory in World War II, drafting top talent from companies like Chrysler, Republic Steel, Boeing, Lockheed, General Electric, and Frigidaire that were making refrigerators, and many more. Knudsen and Kaiser turned auto plants into aircraft factories and civilian assembly lines into fountain of munitions. From the moment Knudsen kicked off the armament program in July 1940 until August 1945, the United States had produced roughly about $183 billion worth of arms, in today's value equal to $2.7 trillion, roughly the GDP of our country. In that period of less than 5 years, American shipyards had launched 141 aircraft carriers, 8 battleships, 807 cruisers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts, 203 submarines, and thanks to Henry Kaiser and his colleagues, about 52 million tons of merchant shipping. His factories turned out 88,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, 257,000 artillery guns, 2.4 million trucks, 2.6 million machine guns, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. The amazing story is connected with aircraft. As far as aircraft is concerned, the United States had produced 324,750 aircrafts, averaging 170 per day since 1942. The essence here is big, fast changes happen when they are forced by necessity. In the post-COVID times, as the world societies are now focused to adapt to a new normal or reset, as we call it, the political leaders across countries and continents would agree that contribution of science, technology, and innovation is paramount not only in our collective battle against this pandemic, but also in shaping the economic prosperity of the world society in its aftermath. The reset is also happening when the world is transitioning through a very uncertain and volatile geopolitical and socio-economic phase, VUCA as we call it. Over the last decade, between 2010 and 2020, the emergence and application of digital technologies and its wide impact across sectors has transformed the way we lead our daily lives. This period has also witnessed the rapid rise of the technology giants on two sides of the planet: Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon in the Americas, and Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, Huawei, and Ant, amongst others, in China. This is also an era when Chinese manufacturing companies transform themselves not only into national champions, but also spread their wings in Europe and the United States, acquiring some of the best known brands and in those geographies. The rapid rise of Asia led by China has threatened the existing world order, resulting in a surge in nationalistic and protectionist tendencies across the United States, Europe, or in general the developed nations. As we witness increased actions on our northern borders, I have to acknowledge our strong leadership and our armed forces that have demonstrated remarkable strength and fortitude, thereby giving a strong response to the Chinese and the other side. To stay relevant in the new world order, similar to our armed forces, we Indians have to rise up and be able to counter the Chinese challenges across every sector and industry. Therefore, I personally believe that the Honorable Prime Minister's clarion call of building an Atmanirbhar Bharat is very contextual and should be viewed as an exemplary effort and his strong resolve to convert a crisis into an opportunity. He has rightly said, amidst the challenges we are all encountering, the 1.3 billion Indians have collectively embarked on one mission: to make an Atmanirbhar Bharat. What is also important to acknowledge is that while we in India have embarked on this mission, every other country in the world are shaping their national agendas to re-emphasize on strengthening the national manufacturing, industrial, and technological capabilities in the strategic sectors. Japan is consolidating all its assets and enhancing the competitiveness of its industries. The United States has given a renewed thrust on rapid infrastructure build-up. Europe is supporting its industries through focused interventions, particularly in frontier technologies that would help the world get closer to the sustainability goals. And President Macron has announced a grand plan to modernize the country's strategic sector with special emphasis on supporting private sector as against public companies in the past. The Atmanirbhar Bharat mission should be viewed in this backdrop. It's a national agenda to strengthen India's capabilities in strategic sectors with the help of private sector companies in addition to the state. For the first time, we would see the Indian private sector taking center stage in defense, aerospace, space, atomic energy, railways, amongst others. While we achieve self-reliance in such strategic sectors, we continue to focus on achieving global scale, like in other sectors such as auto components, pharmaceuticals, textiles, apparel, electronics, amongst others. As we prepare ourselves for the new normal, the prime focus has to be on indigenous research and development and impact-driven innovation that would generate intellectual property within India, enhance future economic prosperity, and promote inclusive growth. Leveraging its wide industrial and scientific and technological base, India has to attain self-sufficiency in critical technologies, thereby strengthening our national sovereignty. I am hopeful that the Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, STIP 2020, is being drafted, keeping these aforesaid imperatives in view. Through this policy, I am also hopeful that we would overcome the artificial barriers that have been created in the form of undue regulations, complex bureaucratic structures, and allow the prime movers of science and technology to seamlessly exchange ideas, information, technologies, research learnings, and help accelerate the process of innovation and translating lab-scale innovation to industrial-scale products and successes, and thus unleash the true potential of science and technology to create economic value and growth in the country. As I conclude, what comes to my mind are the visuals from the 7th September 2019 of our Honorable Prime Minister hugging the chairman of ISRO after the space agency lost contact with the Vikram lander. It was an emotional moment not merely for the ISRO fraternity, but for the entire nation, which was anxiously waiting for this achievement. The gesture was meant to keep the morale of the scientific community and in particular ISRO management high and urge them to stay motivated to achieve more in the future. ISRO is committed with even greater resolve to plan Chandrayaan-3, a manned mission to space, and launch interplanetary missions to Venus, Mars, and the Sun. I think every Indian associated himself with that warm gesture by the Prime Minister. It is hard to recollect a similar incident from the past, other than from the cricket, hockey, or sports, when all Indians were collectively moved and turned emotional. What is significant is that science and technology is now increasingly getting intertwined with a normal Indian's life. Common man is beginning to take pride and relate with the work and achievements recorded by our science and technology institutions, the ISROs, the DRDO, the CSIR labs, the Department of Biotechnology, amongst others, and also the private sector companies and the budding startups creating new technology solutions. This to me is the fundamental transformation that I see in the new India, the young India of the 21st century, standing firm on the foundational pillars created by science, technology, and innovation. Thank you.
Janak, you're mute. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your very insightful comments and reminding us that shocks and challenges really offer great opportunities for innovation to flourish and also laying the path for a new India. I'm going to start with a question about Bharat Forge, actually. You've had a very successful and exciting journey over the last 50-odd years. You started with the expertise in forging and metallurgy, and now you've transformed and also looking at artillery guns. Could you share your experience of this transformation? And also, I know that technology and innovation is very core to your philosophy as a company. Has this always been the case, or was there a moment when you realized that this had to be a major driver for long-term business expansion and growth?
No, thanks for the question, Janak. No, we have always had innovation as a major part of our DNA in our company. And, many people may not know, but we are India's first MNC, much before any of the big companies became multinational. And this was all driven by our urge to innovate and develop. Our first inflection point was in the 1990 when we completely changed our business model from using, instead of using manpower or muscle power as I call it, to using brain power. So we converted our plants to full automation, robotics, and that was the time in 1991 India also got liberalized, so we got a little push from that liberalization. And then in the year 2001, we decided that we need to go. India was not big enough. Forging is a very niche business. It's not a very high volume. It's not a consumer business. So we needed to find larger markets where we could sell our product. So we decided we need to go out and look at how we can be in other geographies of the world. And that was the best period of our journey between the year 2000 to 2008, before the financial crisis created a meltdown. I think we grew by more than 10x in those 8 years. And that happened because we went and set up facilities in Germany and in Sweden and in the United States. Of course, after that, the world got interconnected after the financial meltdown. And then, we have had one problem after the other in terms of the European downturn. And now we have this COVID issue that's creating pretty much of a havoc in every economy all over the world. But in spite of that, innovation has been part of our DNA, always trying to do something different, always trying to find opportunities. And as far as defense is concerned, that's something that was driven largely by the Prime Minister's Make in India initiative in December 2014. And maybe 1 or 2 years before that, we were always thinking as to why, we got technology from Beaufort in 1984, and we have never been able to make an artillery gun ourselves. And, artillery gun and guns in general are largely forgings. They are largely metallurgical components. And we said, we are so good in metallurgy, we have so many metallurgists and so many engineers in our plant, why can't we do this and make this happen? It just so happened that sometimes, you need a little bit of luck. There was a facility that was shutting down in Switzerland that was making artillery guns for the US Army during the Middle East war. And it was for sale. And, within 24 hours, I went and bought that facility and moved it to India. It would not have been possible in today's times because there would have been multiple restrictions by different governments in moving armament technology. But we moved the equipment, but our engineers mastered the processes in a very short period of time. And then we used our knowledge of metallurgy and forging, and in less than 3 years, we produced our first gun. So that's the story. Our aim is to be the largest artillery manufacturer in the globe by 2030. That's our aim. And one of the things I must mention here, one of the reasons why we are successful in our business is largely because we don't depend just on know-how. We depend a lot on know-why of things. And this is the missing piece in India's technology and innovation scene, the know-why.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to take you back to the 2000 to 2010 period, or 2008 period that you mentioned that you grew 10x. That's when your expansion into several geographies occurred, as you mentioned. Coming back to, these are sort of individual cases where you do hear about such success stories emerging. But if you take our Indian industry, would you say that we're too domestically focused? I mean, companies are realizing the value of exports and the importance of them. But in your experience, your expansion and exposure to various markets, how did that impact your access to technology and really contribute to your growth? Because one of the things is that having exposure to these markets obviously allows you to access certain technologies. The buyers demand certain quality, and it really improves the competitiveness of firms. So if you could share that for the benefit of our viewers too. I think you're on mute. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I'm not on mute. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, I think it's very important to be in the global supply chains because the global supply chains demand the best in terms of product, in terms of quality, in terms of performance, and everything else that's connected with manufacturing. So I think that's the contribution of being in the global supply chain. But as far as technology is concerned, you know, it's the other way around. Somehow in India, for the last 70 years, we are used to getting technology. We all the time talk about technology transfer, TOT, technology collaborations, etc. But in our case, we were actually giving technology to our companies in Germany and France and the United States. And it was exactly the reverse. And I think this is what India lacks. India, somewhere we have got stuck in this rut of all the time thinking that we need technology. I think we have a lot of technology. We just need to innovate and make sure we apply it. We need to create the ecosystem within the country that kind of accepts that Indian technology is as good, sometimes better than the technology outside. And we need to create a process by which we start marketing our technologies. Why do we have to all the time go to Germany and Japan and, I don't know where else, Korea, X, Y, Z for technology? I think all those technologies are available in this country. I was reading a book called The Mind of an Engineer. This is a book that is generated by, I think, Springer something, but it is from the INE. And it's, there's a lot of contribution of the top scientific community in this book. But there is one paragraph that kind of intrigued me. And that paragraph reads something like this. It says, Indians abroad, especially from IITs, are now ranked almost fourth in the amount of venture funding that has been able to get generated through startups. And it goes on to say, we should find out as to why we can't do it here with all our IITs and everything else. Now, what we are simply forgetting is when you go outside, whether you are a Mr. Heading the Microsoft, or you're heading Apple, Alphabet, or you're heading one of those big companies. There are so many Indians that are CEOs of these large companies. I mean, they succeed extremely well outside. We all succeed extremely well when we go outside. Why don't we succeed when we are here? I think that's a question that we really need to answer. And I think I alluded to that in my talk a little bit in terms of the regulation. I didn't want to be too harsh with my comments, but I alluded to that. And I think that's the problem that we have, which we need to solve. If you look at the response that India and Indian scientific community, actually led by the PSA during the COVID crisis in terms of managing things like PPEs and ventilators and masks and the help that was required to provide for patients who were kind of infected with the COVID-19 virus. I mean, it was amazing as to how the silos were broken and how things kind of happened. Yeah, we were in a mission mode, but I think more than a mission mode, I think emotionally India was connected with this problem, and emotionally India reacted that we have to solve this problem.
I think that
ISRO example I gave.
Correct. I think the mission mode and the challenges posed by COVID, obviously bringing, or forcing these kind of partnerships between public institutions, industry, startups, numerous stories that emerged on this. Do you think there's been a fundamental mindset change in Indian industry after this period where they will look at startups as opportunities for newer technologies or expansion possibilities? Is the COVID period perhaps given industry that opportunity? Because we all know that Indian industry, you mentioned about, that there is homegrown technology, but at one level, you also see very low level of spending on R&D and innovation in India. And industry really has not contributed in at least, in GDP growth, the contribution from the private sector has been rather weak for the past 10 years, I would say. And Indian industry, in terms of its contribution to spending on R&D, has been weak for almost 3 decades now, or perhaps even longer. So what would it take? I mean, is it just the regulation that has inhibited firms from really investing, or is it something more which would need to be looked at to really encourage industry to spend a lot more, become the core of our national innovation system, and really step up in terms of its contribution to the growth story?
I think what you are saying is very true. But let me give you the flip side of this. For Indian, first of all, I think Indian industry in sectors where there is demand has stepped up pretty well. If you look at the pharma story, if you look at the automotive story, it's kind of subdued today. But look at the automotive component story. We are all, it's one of the largest exporters of products in the world, supplying to almost every company or every OEM around the world. The same is with our pharma companies. I mean, they have become the generic producers of pharmaceuticals for the world. And I think it's just a small step away from there to put in a little more research, innovation, to become one of the big pharma companies that have all this intellectual property. The issue here is that we have to open up sectors where you are prepared to accept Indian companies supplying products. Like the defense sector has been opened up. So after a long time, we now have the defense sector with a clear-cut policy where the Honorable Defense Minister has announced a couple of weeks ago that these 101 items will not be imported in the country, artillery guns being one of them. Now, once you have a policy like that, and then you are very clear what your markets are, automatically you will see innovation happening in this sector. Now, the agricultural sector has been opened up, the farm sector with this new farm policy that has come out. People misunderstand the farm policy, but there is a huge opportunity in this farm policy for industry to connect with agriculture, to create new technologies that are connected with farming, with storage, with distribution, all kinds of things, and with processing. We are talking about COVID. I don't know, you must have seen this on the television. I was just seeing this yesterday, and I was a little bit shocked to see the numbers. There was a little interview on the BBC which said that just to transport the vials of vaccine, you need 8,747 running every day. 8,747, which means India would need 100 new airports. And nobody looks at these issues. You need maybe 10 more vial making factories making these glass vials, because you have to make them in, I don't know, billions of pieces. So one thing is to find the vaccine, but another, the bigger problem is the logistics issue of how do you transport vaccine. And it is supposed to be transported at somewhere between -20 to -80 degrees. So that's another problem. How do you find this kind of storage equipment in such large volumes? Now, this is innovation. And you will see this happening because there is a need, and the need will generate products. Yeah, so I think we have to solve the demand side equation first. If the demand side equation is solved, I think you will see huge innovation happening in this country.
You're right. I mean, I think there's a lot of effort going on to map the cold chain and the storage facilities, and I think what you're mentioning about the need for vials, and even transforming transport just trucks to be able to withstand these cold temperatures. And so there are huge opportunities for sure in that space. The science, technology, innovation policy really looks at trying to focus on healthcare, agriculture, climate change. These are few sectors that they're looking at. And so I think this COVID opportunity has come at a time when we need to focus on priorities for India. Just a question about your role in the PM's Advisory Council on Science and Technology, so the PM STAC Advisory Council. Do you feel that now increasingly given this new policy coming out, are we seeing technology really becoming core to our economic policies? In the past, we often had, the STI policy coming out, maybe a new announcement being made regarding weighted deduction on R&D. But is this really an opportunity for us to reset and say, really need to design holistic economic policies in a way that supports science and technology? And do you feel that with committees that you're part of, that you're increasingly seeing this, that we are seeing a merging of our technology policy and supportive economic policies around that?
First of all, I think I'm seeing a lot of work that's going on the technology front, and how silos are beginning to break down in the system. I think that is the first most important thing that we really need to do to reap the benefits of the science and technology and innovation ecosystem that we have. And that's pretty much what is happening a lot through the PM Stack system, and I think it's getting distributed down in all the other systems where technology, science, and innovation is happening. But that's the first and the most important thing to do. I mean, what is important is to understand who is doing what and how can we get this information. I mean, today, for example, I don't know whether anybody has a database of all the work that's going on in the hundreds of labs that we have within our country, both in the government sector as well as in the private sector. Maybe thousands of labs and thousands of scientific community researchers who are doing work. We hardly have information. So we need to create the information system to do that, and I think that's being done. Second, I think the silos are being broken, which means access and trust between the private sector and the public institutions is now getting a far better and much more productive than what it was before. And that is also very important. I think that's something the COVID situation has kind of taught us to do. Third, in terms of economic, let's say, policy making connected with science and technology, I think they kind of go hand in hand. Science, technology, and innovation. I mean, the defense policy is, you can call it a science and technology policy, you can call it an economic policy, because this provides a huge stimulus to the economy in creating manufacturing within India, defense production within India, which was otherwise being imported. So these are the kind of same thing with the farm policy. I think it creates a huge stimulus in the farming sector, in the agricultural sector, to create a new agricultural economy where many people will participate, right from the farmer to a startup to a AI expert to all kinds of things. So you have a convergence of technologies that are going to drive the economy, and the economic policies that are going to drive the creation of this innovation in technologies.
I think, Nimita, we have time for maybe one more question from me, and then, okay, I'm going to draw you back. You'd mentioned about supply chains and the importance of global supply chains. But if we have to look at our own domestic supply chains, we're currently in a tough economic environment. The government is fiscally constrained. We have credit to industry being very weak. So would you say that it's the responsibility maybe of the larger firms that should be giving direction to the smaller firms, perhaps investing in? We know that these linkages are there, in terms of feedback and quality or training that larger firms perhaps provide to their suppliers. But in actual investing for the growth of the smaller firms, whether it's, we mentioned startups earlier, but just the MSME sector. I mean, if they are suppliers to the larger firms, would it be the responsibility of the larger firms to really step up and maybe help in growing the capabilities of these smaller firms?
I think this is really the way the supply chains work. you want to have, I mean, we have more than 300 MSMEs, or maybe a little more than that, who are suppliers in our system. And if you just take our artillery gun itself as an example, I have more than 400 suppliers who come, or technocrat entrepreneurs, who are, many of them MSMEs or a little bigger than MSMEs, okay, but they are from all over India. Now, obviously, we as an OEM work hand in hand with our supply base, whether it's dealing with their technical issues, whether it's dealing with their supply chain issues, whether it's dealing with their financial issues. The government has also come out with some good policies in relation to MSMEs, of making sure that these people get paid in time, they are looked after. So, you know, to any OEM, the supplier base is a partnership. It's part of your family. You cannot make a product without them. And if you don't have good supply partners, you won't produce your product. So I think it's in our interest to make sure that this happens. The problem is that currently, like in the initial stages of the COVID, we had a challenge on the supply side because of lockdowns, because of the migrant labor going off, and people not able to operate their units, etc., whatever it is. But that problem has now got converted to a demand side problem, because the supply side problem is not there. Everybody's factories are running, and everything is happening. But we now need to push the demand side to get this collaborative process between small and medium suppliers and their larger OEMs working far more effectively. I think the desire is there, the will is there, the capability is there, but I think demand's not there right now.
Thank you. I think we'll perhaps open it to the audience now. Nimita, are we sticking to the time, or is there room for more questions? I leave it to you.
Okay, thank you, Janak. And I think we can move to the live Q&A now. And thank you, Shri Kalyani, for being so candid about these things and very open to share your thoughts in the conversation session. And so we will open this for the third segment of today's session, that is the live Q&A. And if I may ask the first question to Shri Kalyani, this is more regarding what is also being debated in the STI policy formulation process about industry academia linkages. I mean, this is one of the challenges which we have been facing since quite a long time, that there is in terms of how industry and academia should collaborate. I'm sure your company has been actively partnering with many higher educational institute and public research labs. So if you could just elucidate on this idea of what are the challenges and how we should go about in terms of resolving this bottleneck. Over to you.
I will give you my experience in this area. Almost 14 years ago, I mean, why 14? I'll go 20 years ago. 20 years ago, when we were looking at in 1990, 30 years ago, sorry, of how to move from a muscle power based industry to a brain power based industry. One of the biggest problems we faced was how do I get educated, how do I get engineers on my shop floor? How do I get educated people on the shop floor? Okay. And there was no IITian or a guy from COEP willing to come and work in a forging shop floor. So we came upon this idea that we will start a little campus within our company and give an opportunity to convert our people who are not engineers into engineers. And we took help of Birla Institute of Technology in Pilani, and they set up a 3-year program on our campus. We gave 1 day off to every individual. We paid for it. And at the end of 3 years, whoever passed out, they got a BITS engineering degree. And in the last 30 odd years, we have created something like 1,100 such engineers who currently run our shop floors. through this program. Then about 12 years ago, when we started our R&D and innovation, we started hiring some people from the outside to man our R&D and innovation labs. And we found that it's just not working because they had no connect with our manufacturing guys. They didn't connect with the DNA of our organization. So again, we came upon this idea that let's send 20 of our employees, 20 to 25 of our employees to an institution for a master's program, which is designed for us. And at that time, IIT Bombay took on this challenge, and we still run this program. It's a 2-year program, 1 year on the IIT campus, 1 year doing project work within our company, but with the supervision of a professor there. And it's amazing as to what it has done in terms of technology and technology creation. And of course, in between, we have worked with many other institutions in India and outside India. We have a close connection with universities in Germany, in Australia, in England, of course, other research institutions in India. So we do this very often. And I think it's a good example. When you need something, you want something, you must create a longer term program. You should be ready to invest, into your future. I mean, we did this 30 years ago, and we are bearing the fruits of it for the last 15 odd years. But initially, it was a lot of hard work to make this happen. But this is academia and industry collaborations don't produce instantaneous results. It's a process that must go on, must be continuously generated, and must be continuously, let's say, kept up on both sides. And at least from our side, we are very happy with what we do with academic institutions. We could do a lot more, but at the end of the day, it depends on your size and what your appetite is.
No, thank you so much. I think it gives a lot of direction in terms of how, as that it has more of a long-term implication rather than having looking forward for quick outcomes out of these partnerships and relationships. That also triggers me to the next question, which is more towards extending into the public research engagement, since at to draw a context from the CSR new mandate, which is about 2% of the CSR fund to be invested on R&D. Do you think that this would be a fruitful step towards it, and how it can ensure more public-private engagement in terms of doing research and innovation? So over to you.
I think it's a very, very fruitful step. I think it's one of the things that you talked about, Janak talked about, how can science, innovation policy and economic policy kind of go together. I think this is a good example. CSR is an economic tool, and science and innovation is on the technology side. So I think, in terms of the process and policy is very good. Again, I will share with what we are doing with it, okay? And I'm sure there are many other companies and organizations in our country who are doing similar things. We found in our defense sector that there are many technologies that we have no clue of, okay? And one of these technologies, I'll just name one, is connected with RF frequency domain knowledge, which is largely used in seekers and, those kind of let's say missiles and those kind of things that people make. So we set up a program in Hyderabad where we take 20 students from the engineering college. We got hold of 3 professors from Israel who then come to Hyderabad and train these students for a period of 2 years on RF technology. And after 2 years, these students go wherever they want to go. So we are creating a group of people who, maybe after 2, 3, 4 years, we will have 4 or 5 of them who will become experts in this field and who will contribute to developing further science in this area. Now we are doing the same thing with AI related activities. But it's hard, one of the big problems is to find talent in the AI application field is becoming extremely difficult. So I hope part of the STIP program is to create somewhere where we can start generating, a couple of hundred AI scientists every year in a ecosystem, because this has become a scarce commodity in the world almost. And this is very, very needed, because you're going to use this for anything from agriculture to manufacturing to defense, you name it, you're going to use AI.
That's so true. I mean, you are already hinting towards what you have in your terms of indigenized R&D and then towards an innovation-driven economy. I think the whole narrative towards building technological capabilities within the country would steer to, and I hope that in STIP 2020, we look forward to such kinds of synergies across. I think Janak is also having a couple of questions from the live platform. Over to you, Janak.
Thanks
For the next question.
So, talking about AI, and obviously China has been investing a lot in AI-related technologies, not just in AI, but the Made in China 2025 that we spoke of earlier has looked at multiple sectors. How do we compete with China, or how do we perceive that? I mean, are they competitors, or how do we actually meet them on the technology?
As I said in my opening remarks, I think one of our ambitions should be to go ahead of China, but I think it's going to take a few years. But that should be one of our ambitions. Now, you talked about China 2025. Now let's look at. I've got the chart up. I've been studying China 2025 for a few years now. By the way, I had 2 factories in China for 9 years, and I used to go to China every 2 months. So I used to make 6 trips a year to China. And I know the Chinese landscape pretty well, spending 9 years in that place. And in a town up north called Changchun, which is where the first automotive plant was set up by the Russians in China. It's called the first FAW, First Automotive Works. So if you look at China, Made in China 2025, what does it basically say? It has listed 10 areas where they call it targeted sectors, where they need to get prominence or they need to get really good at. First is the next generation information technology. And the next generation information technology, we all know what it is. It is all driven by AI, IoT, and all those kind of high-speed computing and all those kinds of things. The second area where they want to get very good at is high-end numerical control and robotics. They haven't got good at this yet, because the high-end numerical controls still come out of Japan and Germany, whether it's Siemens in Germany or whether it's this company in Japan. But they are moving in that direction. And along with that, robotics. They bought the robotics company in Germany, which created a big hoo-ha out there called KUKA. It's a very advanced robotics company. But now the Western world has kind of stopped anybody buying their high technology companies. The third was aerospace equipment. Again, pretty much like us, China is still yet to not been able to develop their own jet engine for an aircraft. Just like India, we've trying it for the last 30 years, we have not been able to make a jet engine. That's one of my ambitions. In my life, I want to make a jet engine. Fourth is high-tech ships and ocean engineering equipment. This is the fourth focused area of China, where a lot of work is going on. The fifth is advanced railway equipment. I think is the highest level of success that China has been able to do is in this sector, where they are now building trains that can travel at 400 kilometers an hour on their own. Of course, they got technology from many places. Then energy saving and new energy vehicles. I think they are very successful in this area. We all know why Tesla has moved to Shanghai to set up a plant. And that has made Tesla the biggest automotive company in the world from a market value point of view, not from a volume production point of view. Then power equipment. I think this was their ambition 5-7 years ago, but this is now on the back burner because they have excess of this power equipment business. Agricultural machinery and new materials, including graphene and nano material, and biomedicine and high performance medical devices. I think you have seen in the COVID, the largest exports out of China has been in this sector. So they pretty much have targeted, defined sectors to move in. Now you tell me one sector in India that we have defined, which is targeted and defined to move in.
I was hoping to hear that from you actually in terms of
the defense sector, where we have now a definition of what we need to make here.
what about opportunities maybe in medical devices? I mean, we hear a lot.
There are opportunities, but the question is, there is no target. You see, the problem is, yeah, there are opportunities, but in China and in Japan and in Germany, except the United States, where it's still a free enterprise, a full free enterprise system, okay, a market-driven economy. You look at Japan, post-World War, what did Japan do? They took hold of their big conglomerates which were there, gave them help, and said, you will be in this sector, this sector, this sector. And they created competitors. They didn't allow anybody to have a monopolistic view. So if you had metals, they had 3 conglomerates that were in metals. If you had electronics, there were 3 or 4 guys in electronics, and so on and so forth. Chemicals, the same thing. And then those companies developed. So without creating state champions, you cannot develop an economy. You cannot develop scale and size. Germany did the same thing. What did Germany do after World War II? Of course, they got a lot of help from the Americans to make that happen. But this is the story. What did Korea do? How did they create the chaebols? Is the Korean government that said, okay, you are going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And now you see the story of Korea. I mean, the gentleman who, founder of Samsung, died a few days ago. I mean, they were making television sets and video recorders and audio equipment back in the 80s. So were we. I was making televisions and audio and video equipment here in Pune. Now, why didn't we move to become a Samsung? It was not lack of ambition, for once. I think these are questions that we have to answer. Right? And that is what I like very much about Atmanirbhar Bharat. People misunderstand what is Atmanirbhar Bharat. Atmanirbhar Bharat is not to put a protective shield against Indian business. Atmanirbhar Bharat is to really make India Atmanirbhar, to make India capable, competitive, produce world-class products.
I think it hints towards, it would be great if you could elaborate on that, because we have a question by Deepthi. She says that if you could share some light on how to create or strike a balance between the need for globalization or liberalization and Atmanirbhar Bharat. And because both are equally important, but very contrasting in nature. And I think you just touched upon it, and it would be great if you could just elaborate a little more on that.
Sure. As I said, first of all, I differ on the opinion that it is contrasting and conflicting with each other. I think it's pretty much in convergence with each other. Okay. I don't think globalization will stop because we are not putting protective layers. We're not getting into an economy that's protected like the old days with big tariff structures and all those kinds of things. That is not what is Atmanirbhar Bharat. But how can a country with 1.3 billion people, with a large population that is within the age of, let's say, 30, 35, okay, that has large aspirations, keep depending for the last 70 years on technology that comes from outside. You mean to say we don't have the knowledge to develop our own technology, our own capability? How come our guys from Bihar, from UP, who are brilliant when they pass their UPSC exam, become IAS officers, or who pass the JEE exam and go to IITs, and then they go abroad, and then they are running semiconductor companies, okay? They're the same Indians who have, or somebody who's running Microsoft, or somebody who's running Alphabet. They have all been taught in the same schools in Hyderabad where many other people have been taught. Atmanirbhar Bharat gives you an opportunity to develop your own capabilities on par with everybody else, with a level playing field. It's the other way around. Globalization, in the format that we were looking at globalization, nothing wrong with my business grew because of globalization. I became what I am because of globalization. I would not be if I was just focused on the Indian market. So it's not in conflict with Atmanirbhar Bharat. You know, we need to develop our own intellectual property. As I said, 70 years we've been bringing technology from outside. It's got to stop somewhere. We got to start giving technology to other people. We got to send technology to Korea and Japan and Germany and the United States. And we need to create that capability. That can only happen through this whole process of becoming Atmanirbhar. And with speed. I forgot about speed. We need speed.
If you could elaborate on speed, I mean, is it speed of collaboration, speed of just the regulation coming in place, the investment and training that we need to not just provide people in industry, but also I would say in government, because while at the top, there's a lot of focus on innovation. How does that flow through to people at different levels of the bureaucracy? To really start thinking in an innovative mindset.
Like what happened during the COVID crisis, we broke down all the silos. The PS's office was able to break all the silos down and really create speed in terms of delivery. And that's how India suddenly, from importing PPE, started exporting PPEs. Importing masks, we started exporting masks. We started producing our own ventilators. I mean, it's something to be very proud about, that we were able to do this in a very short period of time, some 3 months or something, or less than that. I've never seen anything happen in that period of time earlier. Okay, so we didn't require any single window clearances and all that. The single window has 100 small windows in it, and by the time you travel through those 100 windows to come through that single window, the definition of speed itself is lost.
Yeah, that's true. And I have a very interesting question, but I mean, just to set a context to it, that we see that we need a restructuring of the economy post-pandemic, and then there's also, which means creating and recreating employment opportunities. There is a question related to something of that sort, which says that India produces like nearly 25,000 scientists in the form of science PhDs. Against 1.5 million engineers. So anyways, we are saying that there are a lot of technical manpower, or say human resource, being developed within the country. So what sort of institutional or say cultural shifts are required in order to increase employment opportunities or to give more job opportunities to them? So how STI policy, or even say industry or the government, should look at it as one of the challenge, and what is the way forward to that? So if you could elucidate on that. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I think one thing that the COVID pandemic has taught us is how to change and reset ourselves. I couldn't imagine in the month of March, till the 21st of March, I used to go to my office every day and walk in the factory whenever I was there. And after 23rd of March, I have not been to my office. And I'm still running my business sitting at home on a screen. And how quickly we have transformed ourselves to digital technology using either Microsoft Teams or Google Slack or XYZ, whatever devices we have available or technologies we have available with us, is just simply unbelievable. Okay, so what it basically shows is that as a country, as people, we are able to adapt to technologies extremely fast, even at the lowest level. So, use of technology to create jobs. Now, let's talk about artificial intelligence in a simple way. Just to give you an example, how the Chinese created the facial recognition process using artificial intelligence. It's a good story to understand what they did. Uh, they went to their, let's say, the western part of China, where you have farm labor. In the eastern part of China is all very well developed, Shanghai and all that. The western part of China is not very well developed. People are available at extremely low cost. And they set up a process by which they had a photograph of a guy, okay, and they had an assembly line of some 5,000 Chinese, and each guy was given one segment of the face to recognize and write down. So by the time that photograph went from the first guy to the 5,000th guy, the entire facial recognition algorithm was written, but not by these guys, by the system. And like this, they created hundreds of factories because they had to do this for 1.4 billion Chinese. These are people who are not even educated. All they had to do was look at a photograph, and they were told only look at this part of the photograph and say what this lip looks like. They had they had some 20 choices, and they had to tick mark which choice it is. So there, you have to be smart about using technology. There's an article about this in The Economist. That's how I know about it. Not that I have gone and seen this, but so there are many ways. I mean, there is no way that we are going back to the old way of working. Everything is going to be in the future digital. But digital can create a lot of jobs. A lot of jobs. We just have to find how to disseminate digital technology that will be useful for our citizens, for our people, for our country.
So talking about digital technologies, there was studies. These are obviously studies from a year or 2 years ago that talked about India being early adopters of, and many Indian companies being early adopters of AI technology and IoT technology. But a lot of them were really multinationals. I mean, these were multinationals based in India who had access to those technologies. Some work that our center has done, we've looked at adoption of manufacturing practices, and this is obviously pre-pandemic. Showed that they weren't really placing much emphasis on AI, on digital technologies. It's not as widely taken up. I mean, firms are getting. Of course, the pandemic has forced people to think about ways to, at least in terms of Zoom or the technologies that you mentioned. But do you feel that this will really scale up the adoption of digital technologies across Indian firms?
I don't think there's, Janak, I don't think there's a choice. I don't see how any company can operate any other way in the future, having learned to only operate this way. I mean, even today, we are dealing with all our customers all over the world, and 60% of our business is exports. Just using digital technology, because nobody wants a visit from us. They don't want contact. Most of them don't even go to offices. They work from home. but it works beautifully and seamlessly without problems. So I don't think there is any other way to do it. I think what I'm really saying is we need to find how we can create a bigger economy, a larger employment, and more opportunities for our younger people, the scientists and the engineers that you talked about, using digital technology and the digital processes that are required here. So there needs to be a shift in terms of, let's say, our focus on the curriculum, our focus on what the deliverables are from the education system, in terms of converting most of them to, getting somewhere closer to the digital technology process.
So that will really require a fundamental overhaul of not just the education system, but also, I guess, the way research is being done in the various public institutions and the higher education institutions.
But one other thing, Janak, that works well in a process like this is to create clusters. Like we have the Pune cluster, which has been started by uh, you know our PM stack by the system here. And I think as the cluster gets a little bigger and more, let's say, useful, and people start seeing the impact of that, you will see the spread happening much faster. So a cluster approach works well. I think it has in the previous, let's say, decade, the cluster approach worked well for the automotive component industry, for example. We had clusters that were created with the help of the government for testing, for validation, uh, for just exchange of information, for knowledge, and they worked well. There was a cluster in Pune, there was another one in Indore, there was one in Gurgaon, there was one in Chennai, and the industries really benefited from these clusters. So I think similarly, the Pune cluster that was set up by Professor Vijay Raghavan's intervention at the IOCA, I think those are the kind of interventions that we really need to get a group of people, create an ecosystem in a society, in a city, or in part of our economy.
No, I agree that the knowledge clusters that you're talking about, that brings academia, uh, the public research labs, industry, all of it together, will hopefully really spur innovation in these places. Uh, the message is also about, Pune naturally is endowed with, we're lucky to have industry you and industrialists and leaders like you, and of course educational institutions and also the CSIR labs. But how do we take it across to other parts of the country? How do we grow this? As you mentioned, maybe parts of India that may not have access to such facilities and institutions.
That is a challenge. You know, I don't think we have answers for everything right now, but you're right, that is a challenge, and there's a need to do it. Some of it is happening by people who are doing it as part of their philanthropic activities, CSR activities, and things of that nature. But it needs to get institutionalized. Uh, Fortunately, we have in most parts of India institutions that have been there for a long period of time. And there are some of them, for the last 100 years, right from the eastern part of India to the western part, northern part to the southern part. Somehow we need to bring these institutions to a much more higher level of energy than what is there, and really reactivate them to deliver. That's one way of doing this in those areas, of course, but it's a challenge. And I know the most difficult part is with this COVID uh, lockdown issue, the schools haven't opened yet, and every school doesn't have the capability of learn at home kind of system. Yeah, the private schools have it, but many of the municipal schools, the schools run by the government, just don't have this capability. And that's a lot of hardship that students are going to go through as far as this year is concerned.
I would like to ask you to, if you had to give one message to budding researchers, entrepreneurs in this new India that you talked about, uh, what would it be for them to stay resilient? They obviously have ambitions. Uh, you know, what would your message be to them?
I think we need to raise our emotional quotient about making India great. Uh, that is one. What I gave the example of the Vikram lander uh, story. I mean, pretty much like when we are having a cricket match between India and Pakistan, all of India is on one side. And the emotional quotient is very high. We want to win. Similarly, we got to create an emotional quotient where, we want to win on the economic side. We want to win on the innovation side. We want to win on the science and technology side. And I think that needs to be driven much, much higher than where it is today. A lot of that comes when the silos are broken, when trust levels are increased, uh, when people feel that whatever they are doing, and everybody doesn't do things only for financial gains. A lot of people do it because they are nationalistic. Most of us Indians are nationalistic, and they do it they want to see India great. And I think we just need to keep raising our emotional quotient.
I think the two very important things that you touched upon, one was, of course, the ISRO and the Vikram lander, but also, the opportunities that are there to learn from this COVID crisis and the way we were able to just come together. And this needs to be documented, because I think one of the things I feel which we lack, we hear of great technologies and scientists from all over the world, but our own systems and processes, which we could really do a good job of documenting and really inspiring the next generation. So ISRO in itself, I mean, if people really were to study it, it's a great example of leadership from, for so many years. Its independence, its and ability to deliver in mission mode style. And I think that is another example.
And the very important is collaboration with the private sector.
Correct. Nimita, are you taking the next question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, there are a lot of questions regarding corporate social responsibility, sustainable society, and also how we could harness science, technology, innovation for, say, sustainable development goals. So I just wonder to put this question around in terms of, what are your thoughts? You are a part of the PM STIAC, and a lot of discussions around affordable, accessible technologies are happening. So your thoughts on this line would be great to kind of summarize this whole session for now, and then we can go forward for the next one. Yeah.
I'm glad you asked this question, Namita. Just like we are going through this terrible pandemic called the COVID-19 virus, we better be prepared for a pandemic coming out of climate change. Because, if that descends on you, that would be pretty difficult to deal with. So we need to be prepared with it. And therefore, sustainability and creating solutions, technological solutions that are affordable at every stage are important. Now, 3 or 4 things that are important in creating sustainability, and which is, I think, we discussed this quite a lot in the PM SAC meeting also. One is, how do we create wealth from waste? Because waste is what creates sustainability problems. You see the entire stubble burning that is taking place in Haryana and Punjab, and all the smoke descending into Delhi. We've been trying to find a solution for this for many years. But you need to find solutions that are local, small, affordable to a farmer. So that is this whole issue of waste to wealth and creating a circular economy is one of the solutions that needs to be on a top level agenda of our system. And I think from the government's point of view, it is already at a pretty high level, but it needs to be high level from a citizen's point of view. People may be surprised, but waste to wealth as a business is a huge opportunity. I think currently it's probably some 60,000 crore opportunity and increasing. So this is something where there are huge opportunities for our young scientific minds to create some solutions in this process. Now, it could be stubble burning, it could be some other waste, something else. I mean, we have cities full of municipal waste lying all over the place. We keep talking about it. I think Pune, we have talked about it for 15 years that I know of, but we still keep seeing these piles, running like a little mountain in some places. So this is an opportunity, but moving in the area of sustainability, moving in a situation where already the government has taken a lot of action. The Prime Minister has put in a process of renewable energy being a large part of our energy mix. So that's a huge change in terms of what we were, let's say, 15 years ago to what we are today and what we will be by 2030 by itself in terms of the CO2 emissions and everything else that ultimately will destroy this planet. But even at an individual level, we need to learn how to convert waste to wealth. And I think that's an important aspect that we need to look at. Now, there are two fundamental problems here to deal with. The one fundamental problem is in all urban areas in India, whether you A-class cities, B-class cities, or C-class cities, we have only something called ribbon development. That means, around the city comes a new development using the same infrastructure that the city has, without creating new infrastructure. And then we create slums, and we create waste, and we create, unlivable communities. And that creates now this pandemic problem. The large part of the pandemic problem in cities like Pune, for example, is many people who are employed, they live 6 to 8 people in one room. So how can you do social distancing? How can you take care of hygiene? How can you take care of things that are, absolute necessity when you have a problem like this? And why does this happen? This happens because our policies are wrongly structured. We have created this huge policy where urban real estate is at some, like rocket prices. It keeps going up and up and up because there is restriction in terms of use of urban real estate. There is basically restriction on use of land. So these are some of the issues where we need to do a little bit research on in terms of what policy changes are required to change this situation. It's like what happened in the United States, cities became unlivable. People went and left cities and went and created suburbs. There are enough stories available to us right from the East Coast to the West Coast and in between the US. The same thing has happened in Europe. But in India, it doesn't happen because the land is highly controlled by the state. So these are areas, and this is what is going to create the next crisis, the climate change crisis.
No, I completely agree. Sorry.
Good.
Good.
Good. No, so my advice to everybody is to take this seriously, and let's make sure that we all do our bit and avoid the next pandemic that might descend upon this planet in terms of climate change. Water management, which is also a big problem, but I think a lot of work is going on in water management right now.
I was saying that I completely agree with you that, climate is increasingly going to be it has already been an issue for many years now, climate change, and really the issues globally that you're seeing in terms of migration and the problems that come with it because of climate change, will just worsen any pandemic that comes hereafter. With that, I would just like to really say thank you very much. It's been an inspiring session listening to you, and learned a lot. And I'm sure everyone watching has too. Thank you. I'm going to ask Nimita to please pose the vote of thanks. I'm sure she's also as excited. We were really excited to be involved with this session, and thank you for taking the time.
It was a real pleasure from my side.
Yeah, I completely agree with Janak that this has been a very enriching, comprehensive discussion full of anecdotes, experiences, and insights. I'm sure I have learned a lot, so has Janak, and everyone watching this would have gathered so much of more information. And I think there would be people coming back to YouTube to watch this for sure. And I'm saying this, that they should rewatch it again if they have missed it. On that note, I extend my sincere gratitude to Shri Kalyani for joining us today and sharing his thoughts and vision in shaping India's new science, technology, innovation policy, STIP 2020. And thank you, Janak, for being a wonderful moderator and putting your own thoughts and insights to this conversation. Thanks a lot. I would also like to thank Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, the head of the STIP 2020 process, Professor Ashutosh Sharma, DST Secretary, for their support and guidance to take forward this In Conversation with series. A special thanks to the organizing team of the In Conversation with series. They have been working day and night to keep this series alive at STIP 2020 Secretariat and the Science Policy Forum for their tireless efforts and dedication in planning this event. Last but not least, I thank our live audience for their active participation, putting across their questions and engagement in making this event a success. Please join us for the next and the last conversation in the series on 29th October with Dr. Manju Sharma, former Secretary, Department of Biotechnology. And with this, take good care of yourself. Until then, stay safe and have a great evening. I would request our guests to stay on call for a photograph. And I request the host to kindly turn off the live streaming. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nimita.
Thank you.